1795, a Georgian artist model stood 6 hours in silence. He was paid a shilling, his name never recorded. In 1855, a Victorian chimney sweep climbed a flue. Only his boot was found. Who vanished first? A glove in a studio, a ledger half filled, a shoe left behind. Between the 1700s and 1800s, men and children worked in silence, their names erased. The artists and masters were remembered, the laborers forgotten. When work was survival, what else disappeared into dust? Welcome to history's ledger. The Georgians praised elegance, velvet portraits glowing in galleries, gardens lined with temples and grottos, parlors polished until mirrors doubled the light of chandeliers. The Victorians praised progress, rails carved through chalk, chimneys rising black against the sky, factories that thundered until the air itself shook. But beneath elegance and progress lay silence. Models tied to posts until their bodies trembled, hermits paid to vanish into damp stone, children climbing chimneys or crawling beneath machines, men drowned in tunnels, their names never written. This is not the story of dukes or engineers. It is the story of a glove left on a studio floor, a boot pulled from ash, a cloak damp with moss, a cutlass bent in mud. Objects that remain, voices that do not. So let us turn the page together. Let us walk into the rooms and tunnels where survival was labor, and labor was often death. In a Georgian studio, beneath candle soot and plaster dust, a glove lies folded near a stool. The leather is worn where a man's thumb pressed to balance. He stood 6 hours, bound in cords so he would not collapse. The artist painted. The model did not speak. At the end, a shilling changed hands. The artist's name survives. The model's does not. 50 years later, in a Victorian kitchen, a chimney sweep's boot is pulled from an ash box. The boy had been sent up the flue hours earlier, elbows and knees scraping brick, lungs dragging soot. The master shouted up. No answer. The fire was lit. Only the boot returned. The ledger read, "Chimney swept." A glove, a boot, both survived. The names did not. Georgian elegance was sculpted from bodies. Artists filled their frames with gods and saints. Their studios overflowed with models, still, sweating, silent. In gardens, men were hired to live as hermits, silent in grottos, props for those who strolled past. Even music bore silence. Boys mutilated to preserve angelic voices, sang to candlelit applause, while their bodies paid the price. Victorian industry roared with sound, but silence lingered beneath it. Cotton mills ran day and night. Children lay beneath moving parts. Tunnels swallowed navvies whole. Match girls rotted from phosphorus. Chimneys roared because children climbed them. Both ages left behind beauty. Georgian portraits still glow in galleries. Victorian trains run on tracks the dead helped lay, but the lives behind them are missing. The studio ledger lists the artist's fee, the frame, the pigments, not the model. The master's book records, chimney swept, payment received, not the child. Elegance survives. The glove does too. So does the boot. The rest is gone. This story begins with objects. A glove curled with sweat, a boot blackened by ash. They speak louder than the records that left their owners behind. Which vanished first? The man painted in silence, or the boy burned into soot? The glove, the boot, and the silence between them. In Georgian London, art was treated as truth, but the truth never included the model's name. Studios smelled of turpentine, candle soot, damp cloth. Canvases leaned against the wall, doorways to imagine divinity. In the center, a man stood on a low dais, his body held upright by cords tied around his chest, arms, legs. He did not speak. His spine stiffened. Hours passed. The wax in the corner burned slowly down. The artist worked, paused, worked again. A shilling waited. If the model made it through the silence. Some left traces, brief, incomplete. A man called Old George, remembered only in a letter, as the fevered man who stood for David. Bet Balmano, a woman who posed nude for 8 hours, unpaid, unfed. Later found in a brothel ledger, then in a death record with no cause listed. The rest, hundreds, perhaps thousands, left only brushstrokes behind. The mystery isn't that models existed. It's how a body could be painted so precisely. Every vein, every crease of flesh, while the life beneath it was forgotten. The faces that hang in galleries today, luminous in oil, belong to patrons. But the shoulders, the hands, the expressions came from someone else entirely. Someone tied in silence. In museum halls, viewers whisper about lace and posture, skin and fabric, the realism of a portrait. But the realism came from a body that was never named. Studio ledgers record pigment orders, canvas sizes, frame deliveries, patron payments. When models appear, it's brief. Model, one. Women earned less, children even less. Their presence was measured in coin, not memory. Imagine the room, a brush dragging against linen, footsteps too careful to echo, the rustle of fabric as an artist leans in to adjust the light. The model does not move. He's cold. He's dizzy. His name is not spoken. Even those remembered were remembered for their absence. Old George for his illness. Bet Balmano for her exposure. Neither for who they were. The canvas endures. The signature shines in varnish. But the name of the body, the very shape of the art, fades the moment the paint dries. A glove left behind, a cord frayed where it cut into a wrist, a stool worn smooth from trembling thighs. These are the objects that remain. When you stand before a Georgian portrait, ask yourself, Whose eyes are you admiring? Whose silence gave this beauty breath? In Georgian England, wealth shaped not only homes, but landscapes. And in some of those gardens, a man sat motionless in a grotto, unwashed, silent, cloaked in moss-damp fabric, paid to vanish into scenery. Contracts were drawn with care, 7 years of silence, no bathing, no leaving the grounds. The estate gained a living ruin, a philosopher in rags, posed in decay to deepen the illusion of timelessness. Guests in satin wandered manicured lawns, past waterfalls, follies, and grottos, pausing when they reached the figure seated in stone. They whispered in awe. He did not respond. That was the point. Ledgers record these men sparingly. Estate accounts list furnishings, statuary, mirrors, and on one quiet line, Hermit provided. His agreement filed between invoices for wine and seed. Some hermits fled within weeks, found drunk in taverns, their cloaks soaked in ale. Others endured, remembered not as names, but as features of the land. The silence he kept was labor. He ate little, slept in damp, wrapped himself in wool that never dried. In winter, his breath curled silver against rock. In summer, flies circled his face. The grotto reeked of mold, wax, and solitude. Above him, in the great house, chandeliers blazed and meat roasted. The contrast was designed, his suffering as counterpoint to elegance. Visitors admired the effect. Most affecting, one wrote in a travel journal. Melancholy, like a painting come to life. They praised the emotion, not the man. His presence was meant to resemble wisdom, or nature, or ruin. He was not meant to resemble himself. Few details remain, a cup rough fired and chipped from years of broth, a spoon whittled down by use, a bundle of moss-stained cloth found decades later when the grotto was cleared. These are the relics of years sold into stillness. The mystery is not why hermits existed. It's how silence itself became decoration. Like a glove left behind in a studio, like a boot burned into ash, the hermit became part of the estate's design. He existed not to be remembered, but to make forgetting beautiful. When the family moved to London for the season, the grotto closed. The hermit was dismissed. The next ledger entry, new peahen acquired, and the grotto, carved into stone, remained, with a single spoon left in its corner, stiff with dust. Along the chalk cliffs of Kent and Sussex in the late Georgian years, smugglers moved in the dark, and the state sent men alone into the wind to stop them. They were called riding officers, armed, mounted, and outnumbered. He rode narrow coastal paths with a pistol at his hip, a cutlass in a worn scabbard, and a lantern that barely stayed lit in the salt air. His horse staggered on soaked turf. Below, the channel broke against the rocks. Above, the wind stole sound and direction. He listened not for voices, but for absence. The sudden hush where surf should have been, the gap before violence. Smugglers were many. The officer rode alone. Records tell of ambushes, men dragged from their saddles, weapons turned against them. One officer was found with his jaw shattered, ledger gone, pistol cracked at the grip. Another disappeared entirely. Only his hat surfaced, trampled in clay. His horse wandered back to the station barn, reins tangled, flanks streaked in red. The sea held no answers. The reports called it presumed lost. The night smelled of brine and tar. Salt stung the eyes. Leather reins slipped in rain. Lantern oil bit the nose. Gunpowder clung to gloved hands. Hooves muffled on wet ground. The sudden crack of musket fire echoed and vanished. Sometimes the body was found in a ditch, sometimes only the saddle. Above, in London or Bath, tea was poured, tobacco packed, brandy warmed beside ornate hearths. Much of it smuggled, the same goods the officer had died trying to stop. Parlors glowed with contraband. The law died alone on the coast. Parliament issued praise, not pensions. One widow petitioned for her husband, killed near Dover. Pistol empty, cutlass bent. The reply, loss regrettable, duties understood. The ledger closed without comment. His name did not return. What remains are things that remember better than ink. A rusted sword pulled from seaweed, edge nicked where it struck more bone than stone. A tricorn hat crushed flat, dug from peat. A saddle stained dark, hung in a vestry until it fell apart. The mystery is not that officers died. It's how their disappearance protected silence. The goods arrived. The tax was evaded. The fire still warmed the room. The officer vanished and was never mentioned again. He joins the glove, the boot, the hermit, another figure erased in service of elegance. In Georgian and early Victorian Europe, the purest voices came from broken bodies. Opera houses gleamed in velvet and gold, lit by chandeliers and warmed by candles. The sound that rose within them was otherworldly, bright, piercing, delicate. A voice stretched across time, preserved in the chest of a boy whose future had been cut away. The Castrati sang with lungs of men and throats left unbroken by puberty. Their voices soared, praised as divine. The cost was not. The operation was done in silence. A boy, 7 or 8, was taken to a barber surgeon or laid on a kitchen table. He inhaled ether or bit down on cloth. A knife slipped beneath water or herbs. Screams were muffled. Families signed away the future in hopes of fame. 1 in 100 would rise to glory. The rest faded into choirs, brothels, or infirmaries. The sound was unforgettable. Visitors wept. Composers filled scores with impossible notes. Audiences described it as hearing angels. But those who failed left little behind. Medical notes say, infection, shock, survived, unable to sing. Their bodies became lessons, their lives quiet. Imagine the opera house, perfume and sweat in the air, fans fluttering, silk rustling, the stage glowing under footlights. The first note cuts through it all, bright, trembling, perfect. Applause follows like thunder. A duchess cries. A patron leans forward. No one thinks of the knife. No one names the boy. Costumes survive. Velvet, brocade, stitched too heavily for the frail frames beneath. Ribbons tied at the throat to display purity. A score marked with applause lines, not the pain beneath them. Some boys became stars. Farinelli, Senesino, Caffarelli. But even they carried the silence, remembered for their skill, not their sacrifice. The others? Faint names in hospital rolls, ledgers of surgeries, lists of failed voices. The mystery isn't that Castrati existed. It's how easily a mutilation became a miracle, how the applause buried the cut. Their songs were praised, their families paid. Their silence lasted longer than their fame. Georgian elegance borrowed bodies just as Victorian industry would. The glove left behind, the boot in ash, the castrato's breath stretched over absence. When the curtain fell, they bowed, then disappeared. The opera houses are remembered, the boys are not. In Victorian London, fire meant warmth, and warmth came from children. The parlors of Mayfair glowed with coal fires, but behind each flame was a flue, and inside each flue, a child, elbows and knees scraped raw, breath caught in soot. Boys as young as 6 were sent up chimneys too narrow for tools. They climbed in darkness, backs arched, limbs bleeding, lungs filling with ash. Some returned, many did not. The laws tried. The Chimney Sweepers Act of 1788 set rules. No climbing naked, no apprentices under 8. It was ignored. Later acts in 1840, 1864, 1875 promised protection. Still, boys climbed in York, Manchester, London. Fire chased them upward. Soot followed them down. The coroner's books are brief. John Kinsey, 7, suffocated in flue. Unnamed, body unrecovered until fire lit. The master wrote, chimney swept. The payment was received. Inside the chimney was stillness. Air thick, limbs wedged, nails split, skin blistered, straw lit beneath to drive a child upward. If he cried, the walls swallowed it. If he stopped, the house stayed warm. Parlors admired their glow. Porcelain cups clinked. Laughter echoed off marble hearths. Velvet curtains fluttered. Families praised the cleanliness of their chimneys. They did not ask who had climbed them. Some boys survived long enough to work into adulthood, their scrotums disfigured by cancer first described in 1775 by Percival Pott. The first industrial cancer, dust buried into skin, tumors rising from childhood labor. One chimney sweep's cap remains, soot-caked and stiff. A brush, bristles burned and warped. A boot, small and scorched, pulled from ash. These objects outlast the names. The mystery isn't just that children died, it's how neatly their deaths were turned into comfort. Families warmed their hands above flames fed by silence. Parliament debated, reformers petitioned, but the flues stayed narrow, the laws stayed soft, the ledgers stayed clean. Chimney swept, payment taken, child gone. Inside the spinning rooms of Victorian mills, noise was constant, a thunder that swallowed voices, thoughts, and eventually hearing. Machines ran day and night, children moved between them, silent out of necessity. They were scavengers and pieces. Scavengers crawled beneath moving machines to brush lint and oil gears. Elbows raw against stone. Pieces leaned over spindles to tie broken threads. Fingers inches from iron teeth. Both were chosen for size, not age. Both bled, sweated, and broke beneath wheels that never stopped. In Quarry Bank's 1835 ledger, Joseph Fowle, head caught, death instantaneous. He was 13, his body removed before sunrise. The machine resumed. The Factory Act of 1833 banned workers under 9, limited hours, and required schooling. But birth records were forged. Inspectors were bribed. A child with an empty stomach was easy to silence. In Derby, Oldham, Manchester, the air thickened with cotton dust. It floated in beams of light like snow. It burned lungs. Mill fever, doctors said. Children coughed blood into rags and kept working. Overseers carried leather straps. Falling asleep meant a blow. Stones were tied to eyelids to hold them open. Standing against the wall was rest. Orphans were the most prized workers. Parishes bound them in contracts. They slept 6 to a bed, ate little, saw family only in memory, lived by bell, worked by fear. Imagine the sound, spindles clacking, belts snapping overhead, a loom catching a hand and not stopping, the blood wiped from thread, the machine never slowing. Cotton moved from lint-filled mills to polished shops. Cloth folded in London windows, soft against lace gloves, bright under gaslight. No mark showed how it was made. In the reports, hair caught in spindle, collapse, dismissed, the names blurred, the pain stayed local. Some objects remain, a clog worn smooth, a thimble bent by pressure, a scrap of cloth, faintly stained red. These remember, the mills hummed long after the children who worked them were gone. Their silence built the rhythm of British wealth. The ledgers closed on yards delivered, not on lives broken. They were called navvies, short for navigators, men who carved Britain's railways from earth and stone. By the 1830s, they cut through hills, blasted chalk tunnels, laid iron mile after mile. Progress ran on their backs. At Kilsby Tunnel in 1838, Quicksand swallowed the ground. Pumps failed. Men disappeared into mud. The project was delayed. Costs rose. The dead were unnamed. In London, 1840s, an explosion killed 32 men. Only 30 bodies were recovered. 2 never found. The company ledger recorded 30 payments. 2 lines were left blank. Across Yorkshire and the north, navvies died in falls, rock slides, tunnel blasts. Some suffocated, some drowned. Many just vanished. The tunnel air was thick with lime, sweat, gunpowder. Oil lamps smoked. Picks rang off stone. A fuse hissed. A blast cracked the earth. Dust blinded. Then silence, broken only by the call for names that didn't answer. Above ground, they slept 6 to a hut. Mud floors, leaking roofs, straw beds, salt pork, bread, beer. No water. Fights broke out nightly. Wounds were washed with whiskey. Bodies buried before dawn. Yet above their labor, luxury glided. First-class passengers rode carriages lined with velvet. Brass lamps, mirrors. Porcelain cups shook gently as countryside passed. Their comfort moved atop navvies' graves. A letter from a laborer survives. If I live, it will be a wonder. The powder takes more than the stone. His name appears once more in a burial record. Objects endure, a dented flask, a pick with the handle worn thin, a boot buried in chalk. Company reports logged miles laid, bridges raised, payroll met. They did not record who died laying the track. Brunel, Stevenson, Locke. The engineers live on in marble and bronze. Their lines carried progress, the navvies carried them, and the earth, still pitted with stone, still lined with tunnels, remembers more than any ledger ever did. In the 1860s, beauty turned poisonous, and work turned fatal. In Holborn and Soho, women painted artificial flowers in greens so vivid they seemed to glow. The pigment was Sheely's green, later refined into Paris green. Copper arsenite, ground to dust so fine it floated. The girls breathed it, settled on bread, soaked into tea, clung to aprons. They dipped leaves, arranged blooms, stitched wreaths. By evening their fingers were cracked, their lungs raw. Matilda Scherer died in 1861. Her vomit was green. Her eyes, skin, even breath turned color before the end. Her case made headlines. Orders continued. At Tavistock's Devon Great Consul's mine, white arsenic was roasted in flues, shipped in tons. Factories in Manchester and Bradford boiled dyes that burned through gloves. Doctors wrote of sores, coughing, green froth. Inspectors reported ulcers. Nothing changed. Upstairs, gowns shimmered in ballroom gaslight. Paris green hemmed into silk-swept parquet floors. Perfume bottles glittered on vanities, their fixatives blended in rooms below. where breath carried arsenic. Gloves softened with powder were stitched by hands that blistered. By night, society ladies pulled them on without thought. A box of foliage from St. Giles still glows green today. A cracked teacup holds traces of pigment. A glass jar labelled emerald, recovered from Clerkenwell, remains deadly. Workers are harder to find. Matilda, a girl in Bradford, a woman in Manchester, arsenical dermatitis, habitual exposure. No grave, just the diagnosis. By the late 1870s, labels appeared, arsenic-free. Some were true, some weren't. In Paris, 1885, girls still painted scenery with the same pigment. Theatre demanded brightness. Even cosmetics joined the market. Complexion wafers promised pale skin, sold across London. Doctors warned of fainting, paralysis. Still, they sold. The divide was clear. Upstairs, Strauss, silk, candlelight. Downstairs, dust, green haze, coughing. The mystery isn't that arsenic was used, it's how long its harm was known and ignored. Ledgers recorded units shipped, profits made. They did not record the names of those buried with green dust still in their lungs. The ledger is thick now, pages lined with soot and chalk, with dye and dust. Each chapter told of a name unspoken, a room silenced, a body borrowed for comfort. Factories thundered, tunnels roared, chimneys smoked. Then, nothing. The sound stopped. The ledger turned. Could you have endured it? The flu, knees scraping brick, lungs full of ash. The dye house, fingers blistered green. The tunnel, a fuse lit, then buried in stone. Would you have lasted a day? Or would you have vanished like so many others, leaving only a boot, a brush, a name misspelled? The Georgians called it elegance. The Victorians called it progress. Both buried their silence beneath beauty. But silence does not last forever. If these stories reached you, into rest or into thought, then let your voice be the one they never had. Leave a comment. Who stayed with you? And subscribe. Because every time we turn a page, we rescue another name. If mines thundered and mills roared, the women's work whispered. It stitched seams, boiled linen, polished silver. It was everywhere and nowhere, present in every finished room, absent from every record that counted only ownership, never effort. In London's back rooms, dressmakers hunched under gas lamps, air thick with chalk and dye. Fabrics glowed with arsenic green, aniline purple, polished to brilliance, while the women who worked them coughed blood. Seamstresses stitched for 12 hours or more, their fingers raw, their wages less than a loaf of bread. Collapse meant replacement. Pregnancy meant dismissal. Laundresses worked in scalding steam, arms plunged into lye. Copper vats boiled with sheets for homes they'd never enter. Burns were constant, sores untreated. The smell of lime clung to their skin, Upstairs, those linens were folded into gleaming silver rings. By 1851, 1 in 3 women in London worked in domestic service or needlework. Attic rooms held 6 to a bed. Meals were scraps. Sleep was short. Their hands bled quietly, their exhaustion ignored. Imagine the sounds, the hiss of boiling water, the snap of thread, the soft breath against fabric. Imagine the air, sour with soap, chalk dust, sweat. Upstairs, Strauss waltzes played, gowns shimmered, gloves rested on velvet cushions, stitched in rooms below where women starved. Their names appear only in passing. Mary, admitted to hospital, arsenic sores. A laundress, scalded in Manchester. A Soho seamstress collapsed mid-stitch, carried out while others kept sewing. Objects survive. A glove perfectly stitched. A gown folded in a trunk, seams tight. A pin-tin left in a pocket. They outlived the women who made them. The mystery is not that women worked. It is that their work was praised only in product, never in presence. Their labor praised, their names erased. The ledgers note deliveries, not the blood behind each seam. Progress burned, not in fireplaces or furnaces, but in pits and tunnels, when air itself turned fatal. In mines across the north, in Wales, in Lanarkshire, fire damp pooled, methane unseen, waiting. A single spark from a lamp or tool, and the tunnel became a furnace. The first blast killed, the second, after damp, suffocated whoever remained. Haswell, Durham, 1844, 95 dead. Hartley, Northumberland, 1862. A beam broke, sealing the shaft. 204 suffocated. The Oaks, Barnsley, 1866. The worst yet. 388 killed, including rescuers. Blantyre, Abercarn, Seaham. Each year brought new names. And then, no names at all. Inquests used tidy phrases. Ignition source, unclear. Death instantaneous. Ventilation inadequate. Bodies were pulled out black, silent, beyond speech, and beyond blame. Underground, men worked in shirts open to the waist, lamps guttering, eyes stung with dust. Boys hauled coal in darkness, crawling through seams. Deputies listened for timber creaks, sniffed for gas, trusted lamps that changed color when air turned dangerous. When it burned blue, there was no time. After a blast, the silence was worst. A whistle unanswered, a check tag left hanging. Families waited at the shaft mouth, clutching shawls and empty lanterns. Letters went to Parliament. Some were read. Few were answered. Above ground, life glowed on. Parlors warmed with coal. Railways kept a schedule. Trains ran on time, fueled by fire that cost more than money. Relics remain. A crushed lamp, a powder horn blackened at the edge, a check tag stamped 324, still on its nail. a pipe bowl half smoked, a boot without its mate. Sengenid, 1913, 439, dead. A 20th century number that ends a Victorian sentence written in soot. The mystery is not that coal exploded, it is how quickly the fire was buried, and the names with it. The ledger stayed clean, timetables met. It did not list who never came back. They were called servants, but they lived as shadows. In Georgian and Victorian homes, silence moved things. Napkins folded, grates stoked, bells answered by children. A third of working women in 1851 were in domestic service. Many began as girls, nursemaids, scullery workers, page boys too small for boots. A butler learned to anticipate silence, a cough for claret, a pause for wine. A housemaid polished brass until it caught flame from candlelight, folded linen into corners untouched by light, rubbed stair rails smooth with beeswax until the cloth turned black. Their movements were invisible by design. Scullery girls lived lowest of all, plunged hands into water near boiling, scoured knives, cleaned what no one wanted to touch. Grease stuck to skin. Lye burned into cracks. Meals were bread, broth, cold cheese. Upstairs, porcelain clicked gently against polished forks. Beds were in garrets, narrow, damp, shared. Jugs froze in winter. Heat turned breath sour in summer. Bells rang whether they had slept or not. In some houses, brass panels mapped the world. Dining room, drawing room, mistress's chamber. Bells called day and night. One girl wrote, "I learned to walk without making a sound." That, too, was part of her job. Rules were unwritten but absolute. Never meet the master's gaze. Never let porcelain clink. Never speak first. When punished, remain quiet. When dismissed, vanish. Ledgers marked their presence only as role, maid, boy, kitchen help. No surnames, no wages tallied beyond the margin. They came and went like the wind under doors. What survives are objects. A cloth worn thin where silver was rubbed. A bell push dulled from years of answering. A candlestick gripped in hands that never left prints. The mystery isn't that children served, it's how neatly they were erased. Homes rose on their backs. Families lived in elegance. And when the ledgers closed, only furniture was counted. The girl who boiled linen never appeared. In Belgravia and Mayfair, silence was the measure of good service. Not absence of work, but absence of presence. The work was everywhere. The workers were not meant to be seen. A housemaid rose before light. She polished brass, scraped ash from hearths, wiped mirrors until they split candlelight. Her cuffs smelled of soap, her skirts of soot, her breath frosted in halls where no fires had yet been lit. By morning, the house gleamed, as if it had done so on its own. In sculleries, stone sinks filled with greasy water. Knives clattered, hands cracked from lye, crockery scraped together in the dark. The girl who washed it never saw the plates laid at table. The butler moved like architecture. He poured wine before it was asked for, turned bottles so the labels faced out, laid linen with edges aligned. A cough at table meant claret. A longer silence meant no wine at all. He listened harder than anyone in the room. Upstairs, crystal chimed. Downstairs, cheese sweated under gaslight. Beds were straw, garret rooms cramped. A nail in plaster served as a wardrobe. Windows frosted from the inside. Bells rang through walls. Sleep ended when they did. The rules were never spoken aloud, only enforced. Never speak first. Never be heard. Never let a plate touch a plate. Silence was survival. To be noticed was danger. Census records listed them by title only: maid, cook, boy. Names faded between columns. If a servant sickened, they were replaced. If they left, the house continued unchanged. What remains are fingerprints in objects. A napkin ring turned so many times it shined at the base. A bell push dulled in a perfect circle. A candlestick polished nightly, its stem thinned by cloth and time. The mystery isn't that servants sustained the house. It's how deliberately they were removed from its memory. The Georgians called them help. The Victorians called them staff. Both words meant, do the work, leave no trace. And when the final ledger closed, it listed wine, silver, linens, carpets. It did not list the hands that made them gleam. The match hall in Bow smelled faintly sweet, a sweetness that turned bitter on the tongue. Phosphorus dust drifted in the air, pale in lamplight, settling into bread and tea. At Bryant and May's factory in East London in the 1860s, hundreds of girls sat at narrow benches, dipping splints, laying them to dry. Trays clattered, 4 women's heels struck wood, coughs rose and were swallowed by the noise. By 1861, doctors began to write of the sickness spreading among them. The Lancet carried the case of Matilda Scherer, a 19-year-old flower maker poisoned by the same phosphorus. Her eyes, her skin, even her vomit stained green before she died in agony. In Stepney and Limehouse, match girls began to show the same signs. A dull ache in the jaw, ulcers that glowed faintly in the dark, a smell of decay that no cloth could hide. By the 1870s, the disease had a name whispered in hallways and hospitals: phossy jaw. The work never stopped. A halfpenny fine met anyone who left her bench, another for talking, another for dropping a tray. In 1878, inspectors noted girls emaciated, unfit for work, yet still at their places. In 1881, Dr. Thomas Oliver in Newcastle reported that phosphorus necrosis was common among workers in match factories, urging Parliament to ban the substance. Nothing was done. Profits outweighed petitions. The taste of phosphorus clung to supper. Bread carried it, cheese soured with it, milk for infants tainted when mothers carried dust home in their hair. Families in Bow and Mile End whispered of illness, but complaints to masters were dismissed. The air in the factory smelled sharp, acrid under the sweetness, and when girls wiped their mouths on aprons, green dust smeared their cheeks. Luxury was struck bright by their silence. A gentleman in Belgravia lit a cigar with a Bryant and May match, flame leaping alive against his boot. A lady touched fire to a dozen candles before a mirror in Kensington, their glow soft against glass. In Covent Garden opera houses, chandeliers hissed with gas mantles lit by the same sticks. The parlors and stages glowed while the girls in Bow coughed into rags. In July 1888, silence cracked. 1,000 girls walked out of the Bow factory, their wages eaten by fines, their teeth aching, their patience gone. The strike was led by Annie Besant, a journalist and activist, who published their plight in the link under the title, White Slavery in London. Newspapers carried their faces for the first time, pale, thin, wrapped in shawls, jaws bound in cloth. For 3 weeks they held fast. Public sympathy grew. Bryant and May yielded. Fines were reduced. Conditions marginally improved. For once, their voices were louder than the hiss of phosphorus, but the dust did not disappear. In 1892, a coroner in Bow recorded the death of Sarah Gooding, age 17, as necrosis of the jaw, habitual exposure. In 1895, another girl from Stepney was buried under the same diagnosis. The 1906 White Phosphorus Prohibition Act, passed after decades of testimony, finally outlawed the substance in Britain. By then, thousands had suffered in silence. Objects outlast them. A tray still flecked with pale green, a pinafore stained at the cuffs, a box of matches from the 1870s, sticks faintly luminous under lamplight, relics that glow long after the bodies that made them crumbled. The mystery is not that matches lit the world. It is how their flame could be praised as progress, while the girls who gave it breath were left in shadow. Doctors wrote, inspectors petitioned, Parliament delayed. The fire kept burning, and the ledgers stayed clean. Cases shipped, profit taken, markets expanded never. Sarah Gooding, 17, Bow, 1892. Never. The girl in Stepney, 1895. Never the laughter that turned thin, the cough that ended it, the silence that followed. Stone dust thickened the air until it scratched the throat raw. The builders of bridges, monuments, and sewers labored in clouds that erased their lungs long before their names. London's great embankments rose in the 1860s, terraces of granite holding back the Thames, lamps shining along new stone stairs. Admirers praised the sweep of Bazalgette's design, the grandeur of progress. They did not smell the lime and mortar, acrid as bile, burning the skin of the men who cut and laid every block. The great stink of 1858 drove Parliament from Westminster. Joseph Bazalgette was ordered to build a new sewer system for the capital. By the early 1860s, thousands of laborers were sent underground into deep channels, clay and gravel pressing around them. The tunnels reeked of human waste and methane. Lamps hissed, air shifted heavy against lungs. Explosions came sudden, walls collapsed without warning. Newspapers reported delays. Coroners wrote, suffocated. The names of the men who drowned in foul water seldom reached the page. Quarries supplied the stone. In Portland, Dorset, men cut limestone that built St. Paul's, the British Museum, and endless terraces of London townhouses. By the 1870s, convicts and poor masons alike swung chisels until arms shook. The dust clung to lashes, filled lungs. Stonecutter's phthisis, doctors called it, the lungs eaten by invisible shards. Whole villages coughed themselves into silence before 40. Their children inherited coughs before they inherited tools. Other wonders rose from this silence. The Crystal Palace of 1851, celebrated as a marvel of glass and iron. Thousands walked beneath its vaults, admiring exhibits, never thinking of the men on scaffolds who fell while hauling panes heavier than themselves. Their names are absent from the guidebooks. The date of opening is remembered. The men who never returned are not. The senses inside those works are not in records, but they remain. The taste of lime dust that burned lips raw, the feel of mortar stinging cuts, of ropes slipping in wet hands, the sound of chisels ringing against stone until ears buzzed for hours after, the smell of wet plaster, foul water, tar, and sweat. The sight of light vanishing when a collapse filled a tunnel with dust. Above ground, refinement glowed. Blackfriars Bridge spanned the river in stone arches admired by tourists. The embankment became a promenade, lamps throwing golden light over the Thames. Parlors gleamed with coal fires. Children read beside desks, built of oak carved smooth. Architects' names were engraved in plaques. The laborers who cut the stone, laid the brick, and drowned in the tunnels were not. Objects tell their part. A mason's hammer blackened by sweat. A clay pipe dropped in a sewer shaft, its bowl still packed with tobacco half burned. A trowel stained permanently white with lime. A fragment of rope frayed where a hand slipped. These survive longer than the men who carried them. The mystery is not that such marvels required bodies. It is how cleanly their sacrifice was erased. Cities listed their bridges and embankments as triumphs. Ledgers counted bricks delivered, hours worked, wages paid. Not one wrote the names of those who coughed themselves to silence, or the men sealed in sewage and stone. The monuments remain bright, the silence beneath them darker still. The ground swallowed men whole. Coal fed the empire. Fires in parlors, engines on rails, ships at sea. But every ton began with a body lowered into darkness. The cage creaked. Oil lamps hissed. Timber smelt of sap and sweat where palms had polished it smooth. The air changed by the yard, cool, then stale, then hot, and close as cloth. Dust rose with each bootstep and settled on tongues like grit. Haswell Colliery, Durham, 28th September, 1844. 95 dead. Fire damp found a naked light and turned air into fire. The inquest wrote, loss of life considerable. The parish register filled with burials. Some bodies were never found. Hartley, Northumberland, 16th January, 1862. The pumping engine beam snapped and sealed the single shaft. 204 men and boys suffocated behind timber and stone while their families kept vigil in frost. The nation read the lists by candlelight. The Coal Mines Regulation Act of 1862 followed. Every mine henceforth must have two ways out. It came too late for Hartley. The Oaks, Barnsley, 12th to 13th December, 1866. The largest explosion of the age, 361 in the first blast, 27 rescuers in the second. Smoke boiled from the headgear. Relief funds filled too slowly. It took months to cool the pit enough to bury. The silence lasted longer. Blantyre, Lanarkshire, 22nd October, 1877. 207 dead. Abercarn, Monmouthshire, 11th September, 1878. 268. Seaham, County Durham, 8th September, 1880 to 164. Trimden Grange, 16 February, 1882 to 74. Reports repeated themselves until language went numb. Ignition, after damp. Death instantaneous. Underground, the senses kept their own ledger. The smell of oil on a Davy lamp, Sir Humphrey Davy's 1815 miracle, faintly metallic when air ran right, sharp when it did not. The sour breath of after damp, stealing knees before it stole sight. The sting of coal dust in cuts. The feel of the roof talking through props. Creaks that ran like whispers through timber. The taste of grit that never left the mouth. A hiss from a shot hole. The fuse burning too fast. A roar that shook the jaw, then dust in the throat, then nothing. At the face, men swung picks in shirts open to the waist, sweat soaking dust until it pasted to skin. Boys hauled corves through low roads, the harness chafing bone. Deputies split the airways with brattice cloth, sniffed for gas, tugged caps low when timbers complained. When air went bad, the lamp's pale halo turned brown. When it turned blue, men ran. The Coal Mines Regulation Act of 1872 required certified managers, proper ventilation, sanctioned explosives. The 1887 Act tightened rules again. Paper grew safer faster than pits did. Ventilation failed. Shots blew out. Methane pooled where maps said it should not. Ink wrote order. Coal wrote its own. Above ground, coal meant comfort and time. Belgravia's marble fireplaces glowed. Railway timetables were printed to the minute. Parliament debated policy beneath roofs, warmed by the fuel that killed those who raised it. Children toasted bread on silver forks, above coals dug by boys not much older than themselves. Objects outlast the men who carried them. A tin lamp crushed flat, bonnet torn away. A brass check stamped 634 hung on a nail at the pit head until its owner came back to claim it, then left there forever when he did not. A pit tally board with 2 tags still hanging green with verdigris. A boot hauled from mud, leather stiff as bone. A clay pipe dropped in a flooded gallery, bowl still packed with half-burnt tobacco. Sometimes the lists found names. William Carr, putter, age 15. Hartley. Thomas Watson. Hewer, age 39. Haswell. More often they found only numbers and a place. Blantyre 207. Abercorn 268. The Oaks 388, including rescuers. Families waited by the heapstead with shawls pulled tight, lanterns guttering, letters for pensions folded small in aprons that would never be answered. The language at inquests was always polite. Ignition likely from a blown-out shot. Ventilation inadequate. Neglect not proven. The deputies who had tied the Braddises slept in the ground. The managers whose names were written cleanly in the minutes went home under warm roofs coal had paid for. Walk a disused line and the rails still sing. Cross a reclaimed spoil heap and daisies hide the black. But the ground keeps its own book. Charred timbers beneath a pasture, a shaft capped with concrete and grass, a name on a stone everyone passes on the way to the shops. Sanganid, Glamorgan, 14 October 1913, 439. A 20th century figure that sits like a full stop at the end of a Victorian sentence written in ash. The habit of forgetting had already been learned. The mystery is not that coal demanded lives. It is how quickly warmth and motion covered them. A mine hears prayers. A company hears profit. A nation hears the timetable. The silence falls into the space between. The engineers' names remain. Brunel, Stevenson, Bazalgette, engraved in brass and marble. The miners' names blur, smudged in parish books, or not written at all. And when the ledger closed each season, it balanced the same way. Tons extracted, wagons shipped, accounts settled. The bodies stayed in stone. The dust settled everywhere. The silence did not move. The bells were never silent. In kitchens and sculleries, boards of brass hung like clocks, each plate stamped with a room. Dining room, nursery, mistress's chamber. One bell trembled, another clattered, a third stuck in damp. A boy listened, wiped grease from his hands, and ran. In Mayfair and Belgravia, the households glowed, curtains drawn in velvet folds, marble hearths bright with fire, silver polished until the candlesticks threw back light. But the shine belonged to hands that never appeared in portraits, never earned a line in inventories, Servants were the scaffolding of luxury, built to be hidden. A housemaid's morning began before dawn. Brass knobs and banisters, mirrors, hearths, each rubbed until no trace of yesterday remained. Beeswax and soot clung to her skirts. Ash smeared into her cuffs. Her breath hung white in cold corridors where no fire had been set yet. When the family descended hours later, rooms looked untouched. That was the point. In the scullery, the smell was soap and grease. Stone sinks filled with water that steamed faint in winter, stank in summer. Fingers cracked, nails split, crockery clattered, knives scraped, copper pans banged hollow. Plates broke skin as often as they broke in two. Above, porcelain chimed lightly against forks. Music drifted faintly from the drawing room, two worlds inside one house. The butler's silence was more exact. He knew the master's cough from across a room. A third pull of the bell cord meant claret, not port. A pause at table meant another bottle. He laid labels outward, crystal so polished that cloth made it sing. He moved like furniture that had learned to walk. By 1851, 1 in 3 women in London served in domestic posts. Census ledgers recorded them in single words: servant, maid, cook, boy. No family, no story. Some lasted years, some fainted and were dismissed, some vanished without remark. Servants' rooms were margins of the house, attics with narrow beds, frost creeping on the inside of glass. A single nail in plaster for a wardrobe. In summer heat pressed until breath clung to sheets. In winter, jugs froze solid before dawn. Bells rang whether they had slept or not. The house taught its own rules. Never pass within 3 steps of the mistress. Never look into a mirror that does not belong to you. Never let porcelain touch porcelain. Punishment was not the worst outcome. Notice was worse. To be seen was failure. The senses kept their own account. The scrape of thimbles against cloth. The hiss of linen cracked with starch. The smell of roast drifting down from upstairs, mixed with coal dust and lye below. The weight of trays carried high to disguise trembling hands. The sight of candlelight flickering in crystal, reflected back in eyes that could not look up. Objects outlasted their makers. Napkin rings monogrammed for masters, polished by hands that never ate at the same table. A bell push dulled faintly where a servant's finger pressed it thousands of times. A candlestick stem worn smooth where a thumb steadied it each night. The shine was their only signature. The mystery is not that these houses ran on service. It is that households could collapse, estates be sold, and the names of those who had carried them simply fall away. Inventories listed silver, carpets, wine, horses. Servants were not listed at all. The Georgians called them help. The Victorians called them staff. Both words made them vanish. They were the architecture of silence, and when a ledger closed on a household, it recorded possessions tallied to the shilling. It did not record the hands that carried them, the voices that answered bells, the bodies that bent until they disappeared. The grave was not always the end. In Victorian Britain, poverty carried a second silence: dissection. Anatomy schools in London, Edinburgh, and Manchester hungered for bodies. Surgeons needed cadavers to teach their students, and the poor supplied them in death as they had in life. The Anatomy Act of 1832 legalized what had long been done in shadow. Paupers who died unclaimed in workhouses or hospitals could be taken, their bodies dissected under gas lamps while their names faded from parish rolls. The ledgers are blunt. Subject 103B, unclaimed. Specimen prepared. No known family. In 1881, Jesse Carter died in a Kent workhouse. His body, unclaimed, was sent to a dissection hall. The record stops with that line. His mother's name is nowhere. The room smelled of formalin and tallow, sharp in the nostrils, acrid at the back of the throat. Flesh was waxen under lamplight. Scalpel against bone made a sound that lingered in students' ears long after. Notes, scribbled margins of textbooks, sketches copied from cadavers, every detail remembered but the life behind it. Workhouse dead filled anatomy theatres in London's borough hospitals, in Edinburgh's Surgeons' Square, in Manchester's infirmaries. The wealthy buried their own with pomp, vaults lined with marble, memorials carved in granite. The poor were written as material. Some were dissected, some rendered into skeletons hung in lecture halls, their bones outlasting their names. The contrast was absolute. Upstairs, the surgeon's wife poured tea into porcelain cups, parlors warm with coal. Downstairs, her husband's students opened the body of a pauper, intestines glistening under oil lamps. Guests admired progress. Families mourned absence. Objects tell what the ledgers omit. A drawer in an anatomy hall marked "No known family." A dissecting table darkened by years of fluids. A jar of bones labeled only with a number. A stained sketchbook filled with diagrams drawn from bodies that once had faces. The senses remember more than reports. The sour smell of chemicals, the cold weight of steel instruments, the scrape of chairs against wood as students leaned closer, the silence in the moment after a body was opened, when even the coughs of the gallery held back. The mystery is not that science required study. It is why the poor alone paid the cost. Wealth bought graves, vaults, tombs. Poverty bought dissection, the body taken in exchange for bread never eaten. Families who could not afford burial simply vanished from the record. No stone, no service, only the note of a clerk, used for anatomy. By the 1870s and 1880s, the debate had softened. Surgeons spoke of necessity, reformers spoke of indignity. But the practice continued. Workhouses across England, supplying bodies quietly, month by month. When the law shifted again in the 20th century, many skeletons and specimens remained in cabinets, the names already erased. The paupers gave their bodies to progress without choosing. They became charts, lectures, displays. Their silence became education. Their absence built careers, and the ledger, precise as always, recorded only the number. Not the life, not the grief, not the hand that might have claimed them, only subject 103 bar unclaimed. The glove lies still in a Georgian studio. Its leather is cracked, sweat darkened into the lining, a finger bent as if the hand never left it. It remembers hours of silence, cords binding a body upright, candle smoke clouding the air, brush strokes capturing every line except the name. The boot rests blackened in a Victorian ash box, its leather curled by heat, its sole worn thin by feet that climbed narrow flues. It remembers knees scraping brick, soot filling lungs, silence pressing down when a cry stops short. Both remain. The lives behind them do not. We have turned through their pages together, the models who stood unnamed in studios, their bodies borrowed for art, the hermits who sat in grottos until moss claimed their cloaks, the riding officers who vanished into chalk cliffs, their pistols and hats found, but not their bodies, the Castrati who sang like angels while their childhoods were cut away, the chimney boys who suffocated in soot, the mill children who tied stones to their eyelids to stay awake, the match girls who lit the world even as their jaws rotted in shadow, the navvies who blasted tunnels and were sealed forever in chalk, the builders who laid stone until dust hollowed their lungs, the miners who fed the empire with coal and paid in explosions, fire and silence, the servants who polished glass until it sang, but left no reflection of themselves. Their lives were not accidents, they were structure. Their absences supported elegance above, silence beneath. Parlors glowed because chimneys consumed children. Ballrooms shimmered because seamstresses bled into seams. Gaslight hissed over dinner while match girls coughed blood. Velvet portraits glowed in galleries while the men who stood to make them possible vanished. Objects remained truer than ledgers. A thimble bent where a seamstress's finger bled. A soot-stained cap. A check tag from a mine, green with verdigris, never returned. A rosary smoothed flat by a hermit's thumb. A candlestick stem worn down where a servant steadied it night after night. A jar of emerald pigment still potent, bright as the gowns that killed their makers. Each relic hums with silence. History remembers engineers and patrons, dukes and duchesses, artists and architects. It carves their names in brass, sets them in marble, prints them in catalogues. But the ledgers of labor remember differently. They write, Subject 103B, unclaimed. Death instantaneous. Worker lost. They tally profits, miles of rail, tons of coal, cases shipped. They never write the names of the bodies that filled those numbers. And yet the silence does not hold forever. We can still hear the cough in the mill, the scrape of brush against flue, the hiss of a fuse, the crack of porcelain in a scullery, the applause in a hall that drowned the pain of the boy who sang. We can still trace their rooms. We can still smell lime in a sewer, soot in a chimney, arsenic in a dress. The Georgians called it elegance. The Victorians called it progress. Both carved beauty from absence. Both carried silence into the future. So the ledger closes here, its pages heavy with soot and lime, with coal dust and chalk, with ink that never wrote the names that mattered most. The glove remains, the boot remains. The silence between them is the true inheritance. If these voices have kept you awake or carried you gently into rest, break their silence where they could not. Like, comment, subscribe. Each word you leave is one name remembered, one page we refuse to close. And when you are ready, open the next ledger with us. Across the Atlantic, another silence waits. Families where cruelty did not come from overseers, or masters, or mill owners, but from parents themselves. Homes that became prisons, houses that became graves. The next story is the forgotten story of America's most heartless parents. Would you have survived their home?